Stop. That's my land. The words ripped out of my throat before I could think. One minute, I was driving down River County Road with a cup of gas station coffee. The next, I was staring at two yellow bulldozers chewing into the fence line my dad built with his own hands. Dust hung in the air like smoke. Men in hard hats didn't even look at me. They just kept working, pushing down cedar posts and rolling the wire like it was trash. I jumped out of my truck so fast, I left the door open. My boots hit the gravel, and all I could hear was the engine roar and my heartbeat. A foreman finally turned, slow and annoyed, like I'd interrupted his favorite TV show. "Sir, you can't be here," he shouted over the noise. I pointed at the old oak tree that sat dead center of the clearing. The one my grandma called the wedding tree because half our family had taken pictures under it. "This is Carter land," I said. "My family's been here since before this road had a name." The foreman lifted a clipboard and tapped a page like it was holy. "Not anymore," he said. "Brightstone Homes owns it. We're building a subdivision. 35 units, 35 houses. On my pasture. On the bend of the river where my dad taught me to fish and my mom planted sunflowers every spring." I laughed once, sharp and ugly, because it sounded impossible. "Show me the deed," I said. The foreman didn't hand me anything. He just nodded toward a white pickup parked near the tree line. A man in a clean button-down stepped out, the kind of guy who wore sunglasses even when the sun wasn't bright. He walked over like he already knew the ending. "Mr. Carter," he said, smiling, "this doesn't need to get messy." His name was Wade Lasker, and he spoke like a commercial. "We followed the process," he said. "The county approved it. The paperwork is complete." I told him he was standing on land that wasn't for sale. Wade's smile didn't move. "Eminent domain," he said, like it was a magic spell, "for public benefit. Flood mitigation project." I stared at him. "Flood mitigation." I repeated. Behind him, a dozer pushed dirt toward the riverbank, the exact opposite of mitigation. Wade leaned in just enough for me to smell his cologne. "Take it up with the county," he said, then walked away. I drove straight to the courthouse, gravel snapping under my tires, coffee sloshing onto the floor mat. River County's courthouse was a red brick building that always smelled like old paper and lemon cleaner. I marched into the records office and asked for my property file. The clerk, Mrs. Dillard, had known me since I was a kid, buying hunting tags with my dad. Her eyes widened the second she saw my face. "Eli," she whispered. I heard. She pulled a folder, then hesitated, like it was hot. Inside was a deed transfer with my signature, my name, my address, everything. Only it wasn't my handwriting. My stomach turned cold. "That's not my signature," I said. Mrs. Dillard looked around the room like the walls might be listening. "They filed it last month," she said. "It came with a notary stamp and a court order." I didn't have a choice. I flipped through more pages. A survey map that shifted my boundary line. A notice I supposedly received. A hearing I supposedly missed. It was like someone had written a fake version of my life and stamped it official. I demanded to see the judge's clerk. I demanded to see anyone. But all I got were polite faces and closed doors. That night, I sat at my kitchen table. Papers spread out like a crime scene. The house felt too quiet without my dad's radio playing in the background. He'd passed 2 years earlier, and I'd promised him I'd keep the land. I ran my fingers over the forged signature again and again, like I could rub the lie away. Outside, the river made its soft, steady sound. That river had fed our cattle, watered our crops, and carried our kids on inner tubes every summer. Now it felt like it was watching me, waiting to see what I'd do. I didn't sleep. I just listened. The next morning, I hired a lawyer from the next county over. A woman named Teresa Lynn who didn't smile unless she meant it. She studied the documents, then looked up at me. "This is organized," she said. "Not a simple mistake." I asked if we could stop construction. Teresa sighed. "We can file for an injunction," she said, "but the county will fight it. Developers move fast. They'll build first and let the courts sort it out later." I wanted to drive back and stand in front of the bulldozers again, but Teresa grabbed my wrist. "Don't give them a reason to call you unstable," she warned. Weeks passed, and my land changed shape every time I drove by. Trees disappeared. Dirt mounds rose. Concrete trucks came and went. Brightstone put up a sign with a cheerful name, Riverbend Villas, like they were selling peace instead of theft. I started taking pictures from the road, date-stamped, every day. Some nights, I walked the fence line in the dark, flashlights sweeping over the ground, trying to memorize what was left. I found survey stakes hammered into the earth like nails in a coffin. One afternoon, I saw the old wedding tree wrapped with orange tape. A chain hung from a dozer arm. I turned away before it fell. People in town acted strange. Some avoided me, eyes down, like my bad luck might rub off. Others pulled me aside in the grocery store and whispered, "They're connected, Eli," like the developer was some kind of local mafia. At the diner, old men debated it between bites of pie. "County's been hungry for growth," one said. "New tax base." Another muttered, "They'll flood down there." Everyone knows it. That comment landed in me like a stone. Flood. The bend of the river had always been risky in heavy rain, but my family knew how to respect it. We built up where it was safe. Brightstone was building everywhere. I knew something most folks didn't. The river wasn't just a river. 10 miles upstream sat Ridgeview Dam, an aging concrete wall that controlled the whole valley. My day job was maintenance work for the water district, patching fencing, checking sensors, mowing access roads. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and kept me close to the land. I'd walked the dam's catwalks 100 times. I'd watched the water press against those gates like a giant held back by steel. And I'd heard the engineers talk about scheduled releases and spillway thresholds, in calm voices that didn't match the power of what they controlled. One afternoon, I stood on the dam and stared downstream, thinking about those 35 houses rising on my stolen property. The water district manager, a gray-haired man named Paul Mercer, walked up beside me. "You okay, Eli?" he asked. I didn't bother lying. "They're building in the floodplain," I said. Paul exhaled slowly. "We warned the county years ago," he said. "That bend takes water hard when the reservoir is high." I told him the county claimed the project was for flood mitigation. Paul gave a humorless laugh. "Only thing they're mitigating," he said, "is their own conscience." Teresa filed our injunction, and the court set a hearing date 6 weeks away. 6 weeks might as well have been 6 years. Brightstone kept building. Framing went up, then roofs, then neat rows of windows that caught the sun like they had nothing to hide. I started getting letters offering me a settlement, numbers that looked big until you compared them to what they were really taking. The land, the river access, the history. Teresa told me not to respond. "They want you to sign something," she said. "Anything. Even an angry reply can turn into a negotiation." Then the weather changed. A tropical system crawled inland from the Gulf, the kind that loses its name but keeps its teeth. The forecast called for days of heavy rain across the watershed. Paul called an emergency meeting at the dam. Engineers spread maps across a table and talked about inflow, storage, safety margins. One of them, a young woman named Marisol, pointed to a chart. "If we get the worst-case rainfall," she said, "we'll have to release water early to protect the structure." Someone asked how much. Marisol didn't answer right away. She just said, "Enough to make people downstream very uncomfortable." I drove home that night with the sky the color of bruised metal. As the first rain hit my windshield, My phone lit up with a Brightstone ad like the universe was mocking me. Move-in ready soon. River views. I almost threw the phone out the window. Instead, I drove to the edge of the construction site and parked on the shoulder. Through the rain, I could see framed houses like skeletons in a storm. I imagined water rising between them, pushing mud through front doors, lifting drywall like paper. A thought slipped into my mind, dark, tempting, and immediate. Let it happen. Let them learn. That thought scared me, because it felt good for half a second. Then I pictured kids' toys, family photos, people who bought homes believing the brochures. Those homeowners didn't steal my land. They were just trusting the wrong people. I sat there with rain drumming on my roof, gripping the steering wheel until my hands hurt. I made myself a promise. Whatever happened, I would warn people. I wouldn't let revenge turn me into the villain of my own story. But I also promised something else, quieter. I would not let Brightstone hide behind the water when the truth came rushing in. The next day, I went to the county offices with printed floodplain maps I'd pulled from state resources. I asked to speak to the county planner, a man named Dennis Harrow. He met me in a hallway, not even offering a chair. "Eli," he said, tired and irritated, "we've been through this." I unfolded the maps against the wall. "You approved houses in the inundation zone," I said. Dennis glanced at them like they were napkins. "Engineering signed off," he replied. I asked who. Dennis's eyes flicked away. "Look," he said, lowering his voice, "don't make this worse for yourself. Brightstone is invested." That night, I knocked on doors in the nearest neighborhood downstream and told people the dam might release water. Some listened. Some didn't. One man laughed and said, "They can't just flood us." A woman with a baby on her hip asked, "Should we leave?" And my throat tightened because I didn't want to scare her, but I couldn't lie. "Be ready," I said. I posted updates online, shared official dam notices, and begged people not to ignore them. My posts didn't go viral, but they traveled far enough to reach a local reporter named Jessa Crowley, who sent me a message. "Can you talk tomorrow?" Off the record, Jessa met me at the diner with a notebook and sharp eyes. I told her everything: the forged deed, the fake hearing, the flood mitigation excuse, the 35 houses. I showed her photos of construction and copies of paperwork Teresa said looked suspicious. Jessa didn't interrupt much. When I mentioned the dam's emergency meeting, she leaned forward. "So the county approved homes in a known flood area, while the dam is preparing for high release," she said. "That's a story." I asked if she'd publish it. Jessa nodded slowly. "If I can verify," she said. "And if you're willing to be the name on it." Rain fell harder. The river swelled, turning from clear green to thick brown. At Ridgeview Dam, the reservoir level climbed inch by inch, then foot by foot. The district issued public alerts, potential controlled release within 48 hours. Brightstone didn't stop building. In fact, they moved faster, like they were racing the weather. I drove by and saw workers hauling plywood in the rain, nail guns popping. Wade Lasker stood under an umbrella, pointing at a blueprint, completely calm. I rolled down my window and yelled, "You need to warn buyers." Wade looked at me like I was a fly. "Buyers sign disclosures," he called back. Then turned away. 2 days before the scheduled court hearing, Teresa called me with a voice so tight it sounded like it might snap. "The judge moved the date," she said. "Postponed." I felt my anger flare like gasoline. "Why?" I demanded. Teresa hesitated. "They cited emergency court scheduling due to weather," she said. "But Eli, I think they asked for this." I stared at the rain streaking my window and understood something ugly. Brightstone didn't fear the storm. They expected it. Maybe they even wanted it because a disaster could bury evidence. A flood could wash away survey stakes, erase tire tracks, ruin records, Water has a way of making everything look like an accident. At the dam, Paul and Marisol watched the gauges with grim focus. Paul pulled me aside. "We're near the threshold," he said. "If we wait too long, the spillway could take control instead of us." "That's worse." I asked what the plan was. Marisol answered, careful and professional. "A controlled release," she said. "We open gates in stages with downstream notifications." My jaw tightened. "The new subdivision is directly in the low bend," I said. Marisol nodded. "We saw," she replied. "The county should never have approved it." Paul's eyes held mine. "Eli," he said quietly, "this isn't about vengeance. It's about preventing a catastrophe." The release order came from the State Water Authority that afternoon. It was official, signed, and unavoidable. Ridgeview Dam wasn't a toy anyone could use for a grudge. It was a responsibility with rules, logs, cameras, and oversight. Still, as I stood on the catwalk with rain blowing sideways, I felt the weight of what was about to happen. Downstream, people would blame the dam like it was a monster. Brightstone would play innocent. The county would point fingers. And my stolen land, my family's land, would be the stage where all of it happened. Paul handed me a radio and said, "Stay close. We do this by the book." Before the first gate moved, I drove to Riverbend Villas and ignored the nitrogen monoxide trespassing sign. I found the side office trailer and banged on the door until a young receptionist opened it. "You need to evacuate these homes," I said. "The release is coming." She looked terrified, like she'd been waiting for someone to say it out loud. Wade Lasker appeared behind her, calm as ever. "Eli," he said, stepping outside into the rain, "you're harassing my staff." I shoved the printed dam alert toward him. "People could die," I said. Wade glanced at it and shrugged. "We're not occupied yet," he said. "No one lives here. Not occupied wasn't the same as empty." I'd seen moving vans. I'd seen a few families touring homes with realtors. I'd heard talk in town about early closings. Wade was counting on technicalities. I turned away from him and climbed onto a pile of gravel so my voice would carry. I shouted to every worker I could see, "Dam, release in hours. Get out. Tell everyone." Some men froze. Others dropped tools. A few laughed like I was crazy, but fear travels fast in the rain. I called 911 and reported a public safety risk. The dispatcher sounded annoyed till I gave the dam's official release number. Sirens finally showed up, slow and half-hearted. A county sheriff's deputy approached me, rain dripping off his hat brim. "Eli Carter?" he asked. I nodded. He lowered his voice. "You're stirring up trouble," he said. I pointed at the river, already rising in the trees. "I'm trying to keep people alive," I replied. The deputy glanced back at Wade, who stood under the trailer, awning like a man watching his stock price. The deputy sighed. "We'll pass along the notice," he said, like it was a favor. I stepped closer. "Put it in writing," I demanded. "Say you were warned." His eyes narrowed, and for once, he didn't look so sure. Back at the dam, the moment arrived. Cameras recorded. Radios crackled. Paul read the checklist out loud, and Marisol confirmed every step. I stood with my hands on the cold railing, staring at the dark water behind the gates. When the first gate opened, it didn't explode. It didn't roar like a movie. It started with a deep, low sound, like the river clearing its throat. Then the flow thickened, white and furious, crashing into the channel below and racing downstream. I watched it and felt two emotions collide inside me: relief that the dam was safe, and heartbreak because I knew exactly where that water was headed. The river rose fast. It always did when Ridgeview released after heavy rain. But this time, the ground downstream was scraped bare from construction, with no grass to hold it, no roots to slow runoff. Mud slid into the current like chocolate syrup. By evening, the low bend of my former pasture was a shallow lake, swallowing stacks of lumber and portable toilets. The framed houses stood in water up to their floors, looking stunned like they'd woken up in the wrong world. I parked on higher ground with Jessa, the reporter, both of us watching from a safe distance. She filmed quietly, her face tight. "This," she said, "is going to be impossible to spin." Brightstone tried anyway. Within hours, they released a statement blaming unexpected release volumes. They called it a rare event. Wade Lasker appeared on local TV in a dry suit jacket, talking about acts of nature and unprecedented conditions. But Jess's footage showed the dam alerts. The county approvals, the flood maps, the dates. She interviewed a retired engineer who said, on camera, "This area floods. It's not a surprise. It's math." People shared her story faster than I expected. Comments poured in. Some blamed me, saying I must have done something. Others asked why the county allowed building there at all. For the first time in months, Brightstone looked nervous. The next day, I walked the edge of the flooded site with boots sunk in mud. The wedding tree was gone. Just a torn stump and raw earth. My chest hurt like I'd swallowed broken glass. I crouched and picked up something small, floating near the waterline. A plastic sold sign, the kind realtors stick in fresh lawns. The ink ran in streaks. I thought about the families who almost moved in. I thought about my dad's hands on that fence. Then I saw something that made me stand up fast. Survey stakes, newly placed, but crooked and wrong. The flood had shifted them, and now the true line markers older, deeper peaked through nearby. I called Teresa immediately. "The flood exposed older markers," I said. "The original boundary points." Teresa's voice sharpened. "Do not touch them," she warned. "Photograph, document, and we'll get a licensed surveyor out there." Within hours, Teresa arranged an emergency survey with an independent firm. The surveyor, a blunt man named Hank, knelt in the mud, brushed off a stone marker, and whistled. "This is old," he said. "Set decades ago." He compared it to the county's updated map and frowned. "Someone moved the line," he said. "Not by accident. They moved it to steal acreage." Jessa published a follow-up. Flood reveals missing boundary markers in Riverbend Villa's dispute. That headline hit like a hammer. State investigators arrived 2 days later, not in county cars, but in plain vehicles with agency plates. They asked me for my documents. They asked Teresa for hers. They asked the dam for release records and public alert logs. They asked the county for the approval chain. Dennis Harrow, the planner, suddenly couldn't find certain emails. The notary who stamped my signature claimed she didn't remember me. The investigators didn't smile. They took computers. They took phones. And for the first time, the courthouse hallways felt less like a fortress and more like a place where truth might finally get in. Wade Lasker tried to meet with me privately. He called my phone, then left a voicemail like we were old friends. "Eli, let's be reasonable," he said. "This has gotten bigger than either of us. We can settle. Name your number." I deleted it without replying. Teresa advised me to let all contact go through her. "They're shifting into damage control," she said, "and they'll try to make you look like you caused this flood." I laughed, bitter. "The rain caused it," I said, "and their greed." Teresa nodded. "Yes," she said. "But they'll sell any story that keeps them out of handcuffs. We stay clean. We stay factual." Town meetings exploded. People packed the community center, standing along the walls, shouting over each other. Some were angry about wasted tax dollars. Others were scared about flood safety. A few were furious at me, convinced I had pulled strings at the dam. Paul Mercer attended and spoke calmly into a microphone. "The release was required to protect the dam," he said. We issued notices as required by law. A woman stood up and cried, "Why didn't the county stop the building?" Silence fell for a beat, heavy as wet clothes. Dennis Harrow didn't attend that meeting. The county commissioner did, though, and he sweat through his shirt while cameras rolled. The investigation moved fast after that. A state attorney announced a corruption probe. They found that the public benefit flood project was a shell-no-real plan. No real budget, just a label used to justify taking land. They found campaign donations tied to Brightstone. They found altered survey submissions. And they found the notary logs didn't match the day my signature was supposedly witnessed I'd been clocked in at the dam that day, on camera, wearing my work vest. When Teresa told me that, I sat down hard on my porch steps. For months, I'd felt like I was yelling into a storm. Now the storm was yelling back on my behalf. Brightstone halted construction officially, though the site was already wrecked. Half-built houses stood soaked and warped, insulation hanging out like torn stuffing. The company tried to claim insurance, but insurers asked uncomfortable questions about flood disclosures and known risks. Buyers demanded refunds. Subcontractors filed liens. Wade Lasker disappeared from town for a while, then resurfaced in a suit outside a courthouse, refusing to answer reporters. Jessa caught him on video slipping into a side entrance, face tight and pale. Meanwhile, the county quietly placed Dennis Harrow on administrative leave, which in River County meant, "We hope you stop talking before we have to admit what we did." My court hearing finally happened. Months later, in a courtroom full of murmurs. Teresa presented the survey evidence, the forgery proof, the damn time-stamped footage, and the state's preliminary findings. Brightstone's lawyer tried to paint me as an unstable landowner with a grudge. Teresa didn't flinch. "My client did not cause the flood," she said. "He warned people. He documented risk." The defendants built 35 homes on a floodplain they had no right to own. The judge's face stayed stern, but his eyes sharpened at the word forgery. When he granted the injunction and froze all land transfers tied to the disputed parcels, I felt my lungs fill for the first time in a year. The final outcome didn't come with fireworks. Justice rarely does. It came as paperwork, hearings, and slow consequences. Brightstone surrendered the disputed land in a settlement overseen by the state. The county commissioner resigned for personal reasons. Dennis Harrow faced charges related to fraud and tampering. The notary lost her license. Wade Lasker was sued in civil court and investigated criminally, though men like him always seem to keep a lawyer between themselves and the worst of it. Teresa told me, "You won the land back, Eli." But when I walked the muddy field where the wedding tree once stood, it didn't feel like a simple win. It felt like survival. Made a choice after that. I didn't rebuild what was lost the same way. I worked with a conservation group and placed much of the bend into a protected easement. No more surprises, no more shady approvals. The land would remain open, natural, and honest about what it was, a floodplain that belonged to the river when the river needed it. We planted native trees and grasses to hold the soil. We built a small raised walkway and a sign that told the real story of the place, including the flood history and the dam's role. Some neighbors thought I was being dramatic, but others thanked me, saying, "At least someone is thinking long-term." Sometimes I still stand upstream on Ridgeview Dam during quiet mornings when the water is low and the valley looks peaceful. I think about the day the gates opened and the river reclaimed what greed tried to steal. People hear my story and assume it's about revenge about me, watching it flow. But the truth is heavier and simpler. I watched consequences flow. I watched lies hit reality. And I learned that land isn't just dirt you can sign away with a forged pen stroke. Land is memory, work, and responsibility. If you treat it like a quick profit, the river will eventually remind you who really owns the low ground.